Breaking new details on the man who slaughtered 26 people during Sunday services at a Texas church as we learn more about the shooter's criminal history and a critical mistake by the Air Force that allowed him to legally purchase his weapons. Good morning to you. I'm Jon Scott.
And I'm Melissa Francis. The gruesome details of a violent life are now coming to light. In the Air Force, the shooter was confined to the brig for assaulting his ex-wife and beating his infant stepson to the point where he fractured the child's skull. The Air Force admitting that his conviction was not reported to the FBI, meaning the shooter cleared background checks. While the community of Sutherland Springs is pulling together as one of the heroes who probably prevented even more bloodshed speaks out.
I did what I did because it was the right thing to do. I hope that the families and everyone affected this community, I hope they are able to sleep a little better at night knowing that this man is dead and won't hurt anyone else.
Adam Housley is live in Sutherland Springs, Texas. Adam.
That was one of the heroes from yesterday. We'll hear from the other one here shortly. First of all, Melissa, take a look behind me. We're actually seeing our first look of the church since the massacre roughly 2 days ago. They moved away one of the portable investigative buildings, just took it down and moved it away as they're starting to at least downsize a bit of the investigation here. Still a lot of activities you might imagine inside that church and outside as well as they're gathering, all sorts of evidence. You can even see somebody here in the foreground doing some surveying as well as they put this all together. Now, we heard from one of the heroes from Sunday. He was the driver of the truck that helped chase down and really forced the shooter into killing himself. The other one is a man by the name of Stephen Williford. He was the man who lived across the street from the church. He grabbed a gun when his daughter said she heard gunfire inside, and he, without any shoes on, ran to the front of that church and confronted the gunman. Take a listen.
The people at that church, they're friends of mine, their family. And every time I heard a shot, I knew that that probably represented a life. I was scared to death.
Stephen says he doesn't believe he's a hero, but a lot of people in this part of the country think otherwise. We're also hearing some more details about inside. At one point, the shooter ran inside the church and said everybody die. He would walk down the rows, down the pews, and go back and fire his weapon into people who he'd already shot to try to ensure that they were dead. And we heard from a 73-year-old Sunday school teacher who was shot four times in the legs as she held the hand of another woman who was shot 4 times in the torso and killed inside that church. Also, as we get ready to get back to you, John, we've heard about the Air Force and the fact that they have an investigation now. We've also got this form that we've gotten here from the U.S. Department of Justice. It's you fill this out in Texas and in a lot of states when you buy a firearm. And what's interesting about this is the document that he would have filled out, is if you look at 2 of the questions here. One is, have you ever been discharged from the armed forces under dishonorable conditions? Another one is, have you ever been convicted in any court of a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence? Both of those, we're told he answered no, which did not give a red flag to the stores here in Texas that sold him those guns. But if the Air Force had put that information in about him being convicted of domestic violence, when this was submitted to the FBI, it would have been red flagged and those weapons wouldn't have been sold. John?
Amazing. Adam, thank you.
Melissa?
President Trump weighing in on the Texas massacre from South Korea as he met with President Moon in Seoul. A reporter asking him whether he would consider extreme vetting for people trying to buy a gun. Here's how the president responded.
You're bringing up a situation that probably shouldn't be discussed too much right now. We could let a little time go by, but it's okay. If you did what you're suggesting, there would have been no difference 3 days ago. And you might not have had that very brave person who happened to have a gun or a rifle in his truck go out and shoot him and hit him and neutralize him. And I can only say this: if he didn't have a gun, instead of having 26 dead, he would have had hundreds more dead.
Well, let's bring in John Bussey, associate editor at the Wall Street Journal. You always have to wonder what, say, the South Korean media think when their president is on stage with our president to answer questions about this big diplomatic trip, and President Trump gets a question like that about gun control and vetting. How do you think he handled it?
Yeah, well, it's a controversial topic here in the United States. Those who say the solution is more gun control, those who say what the president said, that if this other person hadn't had a gun, it would have been worse. He's in a part of the world where you have quite a bit of gun control. Places like Australia got assault weapons off the street, have had amnesties, have reduced their gun violence really substantially. Japan the same way. So I think that the Asia leaders are kind of perplexed by the situation in the United States. And probably want the president very much focused on them while he's there. He's there for a short amount of time. They're very keen to advance their agenda with the United States. That's filled with all sorts of political issues and trade issues.
But then again, you come to the issues that our Adam Housley was just talking about, the fact that this shooter apparently lied on his application form to get the guns that were used in this attack. The system, to some extent, depends on honesty, although the FBI or the Air Force clerical error helped the FBI miss this one.
Yeah, apparently so. I think this is going to be, the forensics on this are going to be substantial, kind of where in the bureaucratic process there was a breakdown such that this individual was permitted to buy a gun. I mean, you can already see the controversy around it. It is just going to be sort of another element of the larger debate over gun control in the United States, and these mass killings keep inflaming that issue, and it seems that it is kind of moving toward some sort of larger discussion. The president may wish to engage with that when he gets back from Asia.
Well, in the meantime, he's got a lot to do while he's in Asia. Obviously, North Korea front and center. The South Koreans have expressed some displeasure that he doesn't seem to be spending as much time in their country as he has with others in the neighborhood. How would you assess the chances of success during this diplomatic mission?
I think it's just very good that the president is there. It's always good to be engaging with our allies in Asia. They feel as if the United States doesn't spend enough time in the region. So it's very good that he's there and that he is talking with all these leaders. He's got a lot on his plate. He has recently sort of begun to suggest a softening on North Korea, a bit of a softening in language, rather, saying that, he hopes that they come back to the negotiating table. That's a little bit different from some of the sort of the bluster that we've heard in the past, a little bit tougher, on North Korea. That's the kind of language that Japan and South Korea wish to hear, China as well. Andrew Brown has a very good column in today's Wall Street Journal on what he faces in China. Andrew, who's an expert on China, expects the president will probably get some giveaways by China, some deals for buying U.S. goods, sort of high-profile purchases. But at the end of the day, China's going to try to play the United States, is going to try to advance its own agenda in the region, and President Trump is going to be up against that.
We are also just learning about some of the testimony of Carter Page, one of the Trump campaign foreign policy advisors who spent some number of hours in front of a House committee talking about his contacts with the Russians. And that testimony and the emails do seem to suggest that there was a fair amount of contact between Russian officials and the Trump campaign. How damaging is that to what the president has said thus far?
The Journal has a story on this in today's paper as well. It's very interesting. Carter Page is a kind of curious character. I mean, he's basically said in the past, hey, it was just a private thing on my part to go give a speech and have interaction with Russia. It is evident now that he briefed the campaign in advance, asking their permission, but also kind of talked about what he planned to do, and then gave more extensive briefings after he came back, even suggesting before he went that perhaps candidate Trump would like to go in his place to raise his own profile. He's an interesting individual. There's been a fair amount of contradictory elements of his testimony. But at the end of the day, I think what this means for the Trump administration is that there's one more kind of piece of this that suggests that there was another admittedly unpaid foreign policy advisor to the campaign interacting with Russia. And on the heels of the Papadopoulos kind of disclosures, this is just going to complicate the administration's efforts to say that it was entirely disengaged from Russia during the campaign, that there was no connection.
And then there are the Paradise Papers, this large law firm that was hacked, and the information is dribbling out about who was using its services to perhaps avoid taxes or, structure deals in offshore accounts, that kind of thing. That, too, is touching on a prominent member of the Trump administration.
Well, that prominent member would be Wilbur Ross, his Commerce Secretary, and the person who is essentially the lead trade negotiator in the administration, or at least certainly the one that's most out front at this stage of the game. And what Wilbur Ross has said was that, look, this is the normal course of business. There were interactions of companies that he had invested in that had contact with Russian institutions, that there was nothing illegal about this, that this happens in the course of complex international deals. He's been pushing back on this pretty forcefully and pretty publicly.
He has flat out said there was nothing illegal, and in fact, the assessments of the journalists who have done these stories say there's nothing illegal that they have found in what the Commerce Secretary has done here.
Yeah, and I think that at the end of the day, there's going to be kind of a sharper look at what those relationships were. But remember, Wilbur Ross was a large-scale businessman before he joined the administration, and he's going to have those kind of more complex deals that are sort of global in nature. And that's what he's saying. He's saying, look, it wasn't illegal. What happened was completely within the normal confines of doing business.
It's hard to explain when, most Americans don't have offshore accounts and they start hearing of them and it smells a little bad. That's one of the
that's right.
at work here.
That's right. And I think that with the Manafort disclosures, particularly where he has been indicted on issues of money laundering and having accounts abroad and having been the lead on the Trump campaign, it gets conflated, and it's just one more iteration of the word Russia in an environment where the administration is trying to focus on tax reform, healthcare reform, better relations abroad. Makes it much more difficult for the president.
John Bussey from the Wall Street Journal. Thanks for your expertise.
Pleasure.
And while President Trump is in South Korea, Fox News is taking you to one of the most dangerous places on earth, the demilitarized zone, a narrow strip of land separating South Korea and North Korea that is occupied by thousands of American soldiers. Here's a look.
I'm Brett Baer, about 20 yards from North Korea here in the DMZ. The sound you hear? That's actually Korean pop music being blasted into North Korea to overcome the North Korean propaganda that's being blasted this way. The sound back and forth, it's a lot different than the artillery pieces that are in those mountains aimed at Seoul. The tension here is high in the Korean Peninsula. Tonight at 6 p.m. Eastern, we'll take you to the DMZ on Special Report.
And we'll be right back. So we are heading towards a make-or-break moment for tax reform as a House committee debates the GOP bill. Kevin Brady, chairman of the Ways and Means Committee, told America's Newsroom earlier that he wants to bring the bill to a vote next week, promising that tax cuts will boost job growth and the economy.
Just like any business, that's in financial trouble back home, you got to do two things. You got to cut spending and get the costs under control. You got to get new revenue. You got to grow as well. And so tax reform is that half the equation. Getting people back to work, getting companies growing, stop sending our jobs overseas can help us in a big way grow revenues.
All right, let's bring in our political panel. Joining us now is Josh Holmes, former chief of staff for Senator Mitch McConnell, and Jim Kessler, former policy director for Senator Chuck Schumer and a co-founder of Third Way. Gentlemen, thanks for joining us. Josh, if you were looking at this, not for what you like and don't like, but look at it strictly as you want to pick up more votes, what's one thing you would add or eliminate from the bill as it exists?
Well, as you know, Melissa, everything is intertwined. And the problem with big tax packages is that anything you take out or put in changes the dials on a whole bunch of other things. And so you've got to be very careful.
Sure.
The one thing that you've really got to do, though, is you can't pilot in provisions that nobody's talked about before in a last minute without doing a full check and making sure where your votes are. Because at this point, the only thing that really matters is that you get enough to pass this and get it to the president's desk. And so,
without question, but do you see something? I mean, that's what we're talking about, the fact that it's all about the votes. What would help? Could you see anything that would help with the tinkering, or are you saying this is the best shot?
Yeah, no, look, I think there are a couple of things I think they're going to have to address. They've been talking about this estate tax provision for a long time. It's got a huge number associated with it, 150 to 250 billion. They're talking about marketing this as a middle-class tax cut. It's hard to see how that's compatible with that.
So get rid of that.
You could potentially trade it off for an increased child tax credit or a lower individual rate. I think both of those things would be helpful.
Jim, what's one change you would make that would pick up more votes? I mean, maybe it could pick up a few Democrats. What's the change that would do that?
Well, definitely get rid of that estate tax. It's a big number. It goes to 2 out of every 1,000 people who pass away, and those are the people who are worth over $10 million. It is not needed. I would make some changes with what's called stepped-up basis, which is a way for people, again, with heirs, when people pass money along, that the value of their stock is taxed at the price that it is now as opposed to when it was bought. And then I would turn it into something that helps the middle class. And then just one other thing, Melissa, I would just make sure that the price tag on this, that the deficit is not going to go up by $2 trillion. Like, we've got to bring that overall number down. We've got to have more pay-fors in this. And I think you could attract some Democrats if some changes were made.
Yeah, I mean, I will let that lie when you talk about the pay-fors, because I think the way of doing math on this thing with the static accounting doesn't make a lot of sense. And the pay-for, you could pay for it by cutting spending, but that's probably a discussion for another time. I like where we're going with the good fixes. Josh, so it's my theory that sometimes they put something out there knowing what they're going to give away ahead of time. Do you think that is this change to the estate tax? Maybe they don't think it's going to get over the finish line with that, and it's meant as the chip to be bargained away.
It could very well be. And look, we're dealing with some seasoned legislators here at this point, and I think that they've been working on this. You know, Republicans have really been working on this for the last 2 decades. I mean, this is not policy that's unfamiliar to the folks who are running it at this point. And so knowing where the votes are a big component of it. They've been debating it all year. There could very well be built-in negotiations away. It is going to look a little different. There is no question. We're in a honeymoon phase right now. I think as we go through the committee process and get onto the floor, this is going to look a little different before it gets into law.
I don't know if it feels very honeymoon, but Jim, real quick before we go, if they got rid of that estate tax, do you think that this would have a chance of passing?
Well, I think it has a chance of passing because, you know, you can do it with just all Republican votes. But I think, you know, this estate tax would be one thing. Making it so that different regions of the country aren't treated so differently. So this is a very, very bad tax bill. If you're in about 12 states, it's a horrible tax bill.
They don't tax so much in those states. If they don't tax so much in those states, they'd be all right.
Interesting. All right, we'll see. Gentlemen, we made progress. Let's leave it there. We did well. Thanks, guys.
All righty.
Thank you.
So Republicans are defending their tax plan after charges that it actually could lead to tax hikes for some middle-class Americans. The head of the House Budget Committee, Congresswoman Diane Black, joins us with reaction. As Republicans are digging into the details of their tax reform plan, some Democrats claim the plan will not help many middle-class Americans. Lawmakers, citing independent analysis, including a report from the Congressional Joint Committee on Taxation, that the tax cut bill could lead to higher taxes for many average American families in as little as 6 years. Here's Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer.
When House Republicans released their tax bill yesterday, they threw dust in the eyes of the middle class. They claimed the bill would be a boon for the very working families President Trump promised to fight for in his campaign. But when the dust cleared, you clearly see this bill is a betrayal to middle-class families throughout the country.
Let's get a response on that from Tennessee Congresswoman Diane Black, chair of the House Budget Committee. So this projection is that in 2023, taxes would actually go up on Americans making $20,000 to $40,000 a year. Do you disagree with that analysis, or how do you answer Chuck Schumer's charge?
I do disagree with his analysis, and I'm not sure what he's using as his go-to, but I can tell you the Nonpartisan Tax Foundation shows that the average person, and I'm going to take the state of Tennessee, which is where I live, the average individual middle income would be about $1,200 additional money in their pocket, but that's before the economic growth. Add the economic growth to that, it would be about another $2,200. So somewhere between $3,500 and $4,000 additional money in the middle income earner's pocket. That's a lot of money.
And there's a lot of talk about this blowing a hole in the deficit. $1.5 trillion is the number that gets thrown around a lot. What's your assessment on that?
Listen, there is no bigger budget hawk than what I am. As the budget chairman this last year, I fought really hard to cut mandatory spending because that's really where the dollars are, is in the mandatory side. So that's got to be, you got to have a balance. Yes, the economy will grow, but if the economy grows as it did in the Reagan years and all you do is continue to spend more than what you're bringing in, then you can never balance this. So it's got to be equal parts. But this tax plan does help to stimulate the economy. It puts more money back in the American economy, which means that more people are going to have more money in their pocket to spend. When they do, that means more goods and services are provided, therefore growth in the economy. And so this is a jolt to our economy that, wow, do we ever need? Because we've been in the doldrums, less than 3% now for almost 10 years.
Yeah, well, you've heard the analysts who say that you cut taxes, it means less revenue for the government, and therefore you're going to have more deficits. How do you answer that?
Well, because with the growth, you also have to control your spending. You can't just say where there's a front, there's not a back. In this situation, there's a front and a back. And we have got to get to that point where we're talking about that mandatory spending. So as we grow the economy, as the American people see more money in their pocket, we also have to remember on the other side, those mandatory programs, those what we call entitlement programs, have to be reformed. You have programs that are 40, 50, 60 years old and you still haven't reformed them. You must reform them for today's standards. And so that's a hard thing to do, and I'll admit that, but that is something that we have to look at on the other side as well. Today we're talking about relieving the people in the middle income, most of all, putting more money in their pocket, allowing them to have more money to spend, save, or to be able to use for other things in their life that they would consider to be essential for them.
Yeah, critics of the tax plan say that, well, when you talk about putting more money in people's pockets, that money isn't going to just stay in their pockets. It's going to go to car dealers and right. Furniture showrooms and college expenses and so forth. That money is going to get spent, and that generates tax revenue, does it not?
It does indeed. And I have often teased that when they did the stimulus program a number of years ago, if they just divided that money up and sent it to all the women in this country, they would have shown them how to stimulate the economy because we're good shoppers.
What about the estate tax? Republicans have taken a fair amount of criticism over repealing the estate tax. How important is it to you that estate tax repeal remains?
Listen, this is a fundamental issue. It really is, where people have already earned what it is that they have. They've paid taxes on it. And at the time of death, that somehow the federal government believes it can just reach in the pockets and take that away from families. Look, you talk to Kristi Noem, who is a farmer. She lost her father suddenly. The federal government came after them at a time of tragedy and said, and by the way, now you owe us money because your father, who was the owner of all this property, has died. They had to go out and make loans to keep things going. And so this is a principle that we hold dearly, that the federal government doesn't have a right for a second bite at the apple and taking money away from hard-earned taxpayers who have done the kinds of things they need to do and putting money away and saving for their family. And so this is a principle that we have talked about for years, that the federal government should not be taxing something twice, and especially at a time of death.
Kristi Noem, the congresswoman from South Dakota, at the subject of that story.
Yes.
Congresswoman Diane Black, we wish you well. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
You bet.
It's election day, and we are watching governor's races in 2 key states, what the results could tell us about next year's midterms. Plus, we're learning more about the Texas shooter's violent past. That's next.
For a couple of places around the country, it is Election Day, and we are closely watching the race for New Jersey's next governor. Right now, Governor Christie's Republican Lieutenant Governor, Kim Guadagno, is up against Democrat Phil Murphy, who is consistently leading in the polls. Laura Ingle joins us live from Rutherford, New Jersey, with a look at that race. Laura.
Hey, John. Well, so much is riding on today's voter turnout here in the Garden State. Whoever comes out on top will be the first new governor the state of New Jersey has seen in the last 8 years, replacing embattled Republican Governor Chris Christie, and could also have an effect on the balance of power in the Senate. Now, you mentioned the two top runners there, Democratic hopeful Phil Murphy, a multimillionaire former Goldman Sachs executive who has spent millions of dollars to convince voters that his opponent, Lieutenant Governor Kim Guadagno, is so deeply tied to Governor Chris Christie that electing her would be like electing a third term of the Christie administration. Now, Guadagno has fought back by trying to distance herself from Christie and painting Murphy as a rich liberal who is out of touch with New Jersey's values and will raise taxes in a state that is already heavily taxed. And one of the key issues here for these candidates has been Murphy's call to fight for undocumented immigrants and possibly make New Jersey a sanctuary state. It's a fiery issue both candidates have used leading up to Election Day.
Mr. President, not in the state of New Jersey. We will stand up to this president. If need be, we'll be a sanctuary, not just city, but state.
People are beginning to wake up to the fact that he really means it, that he really thinks sanctuary states in New Jersey is a good idea. And we all know it makes New Jersey much more dangerous. It compromises law enforcement. It may well compromise federal funding.
And as voters in New Jersey debate flipping the seat from Republican to Democrat, there is another factor in play that could shake things up in the Senate. The ongoing corruption trial of Democratic Senator Bob Menendez, we've been covering it here on Fox. Jury deliberations underway in Newark, and if he is convicted, the new governor could appoint someone to fill his seat. So a very important race here in New Jersey. We'll bring you the latest as it develops here. Back to you.
Get back to us with any news. Laura Ingle, thank you. Another key governor's race underway in Virginia, where voters are headed to the polls right now to choose between Lieutenant Governor Ralph Northam and Republican Ed Gillespie in a state where Hillary Clinton beat President Trump. We will bring you any breaking news on this race and all of the others on this election day as it comes in.
Justin, we are learning more about the Texas church shooter's past. The gunman was court-martialed in 2012 for assaulting his wife and stepson while in the Air Force. The Air Force now admits it failed to enter his conviction into a federal database, which could have blocked him from buying the weapons he used to kill 26 people on Sunday. Meanwhile, autopsy results show the shooter suffered 3 gunshot wounds following Sunday's attack, including a self-inflicted shot to the head. Dave Cuvattier is a retired FBI special agent, former FBI SWAT sniper, and crime prevention consultant. Let me lean on that last part there. Do you see a way that this could have been prevented or that we could prevent crimes like this going forward? Because that's what everybody's asking.
Absolutely. It's something that I hear when I give out the presentations regarding crime prevention, and I'm hearing it more and more. It's becoming more of a prolific call for something to happen when I'm giving these type of presentations. And I can tell you that absolutely we have to, it's going to be a multi-dimensional system or model that we have to put in place. We have a lot of laws. We have to start enforcing those laws. We've got to empower the public. We have to be able to set up a situation where the public feels comfortable enough, they feel protected from issues of intimidation, harassment, if they come forward to help law enforcement when they identify a situation or they want to report something that may be going on. And we have to try to put some kind of executive order or law to protect those individuals coming forward. And that's what I'm hearing. A lot of people want to come up and report things to the FBI or to local authorities, but they're very concerned about their safety.
Well, I mean, there were 2 big failures in this case. One was, it appears, the Air Force not putting the information into the federal database so that when the shooter, it appears, lied on his gun application. There should have been a check in there that showed, yes, he had been convicted of a crime in the past and he had a violent past, and he was able to get away with lying on his application. At the same time, there's also the fact that he was threatening this family. I mean, it was known that he had sent threatening texts and was harassing them, so there were signs ahead of time. Speak to that part of it.
Well, I can tell you, I'm going to split that in two, but you're right. You're hitting the nail on the head. There were two great failures. And again, we're counting on one system, one level of security to take care of that. And obviously, there's human error. As a former, OSI special agent and a 9-year veteran of the Air Force, I was very hurt to hear what had occurred, regarding this situation that allowed this individual to get that weapon. So we have to have multiple layers to protect these things from happening and protect, society. The other thing is the thing that him lying. Obviously, individuals, criminals, people that want to hurt and want to take the opportunity to initiate this type of tragedy on the public, they're going to lie. They're going to do these type of things. So we have to have that in place. But this individual, as far as an active shooter profile, fits it, like a glove. He had a history of violence. He wound up having people problems and conflicts with individuals, complaining, knowledge of weapons and experience with weapons, complaining about different types of situation, a migratory job history. And those are the type of things that are indicators. And if we can protect individuals that knew, and I have no doubt that somebody knew, and we have friends that said the same thing, they suspected things were going on. They need to be able to report that.
Let me ask you, because what could have been done? Because they always say when someone's threatening you, until they actually commit a crime, it's very hard to do anything about it. But in this case, it was clear that he had a violent past and he had acted in the past, and then he's making new threats. Is there a law already in place that could have been enforced, or is this one of those situations where he's threatening and until he shows up and does something, nobody can do anything?
That's the challenge for law enforcement. And from my experience of over 33 years of investigating federal crimes, individuals have a right to say certain things. Individuals have a right to act in certain ways. But until they cross the line, it's very difficult for law enforcement, so it is challenging. But what we have to do is put something else in place to enhance those situations that we already have in the system, and that is trying to protect the public and allow them to come forward. In the federal system, we do have a law that says if you assault a federal officer, intimidate, kidnap, try to hurt, that's a crime. We want to do the same thing with the average citizen, and they would come forward. And I asked individuals in my classes or individuals I talked to that they would come forward if they had that kind of protection.
Dave Kubatier, thank you for your time.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Well, President Trump is struggling in some of the recent polls. Will the Asia trip help him? And what can he do to regain support? Plus, the other kind of polls are open in Virginia, where the governor's race is seen as a test of the president's political clout. Our panel debates that next.
Hearing this morning on Puerto Rico, lawmakers are focusing on the role of Puerto Rico's Federal Oversight Board in the recovery from Hurricanes Irma and Maria, as well as the island's government-owned power company. Many of the questions today will likely focus on that now canceled $300 million contract to a two-person firm in Montana to help rebuild Puerto Rico's electric infrastructure. The latest data shows that only 42% of the island has power. That is 7 weeks after Maria made landfall.
As we mentioned earlier, it is election day in a lot of places around the country. We are closely watching two big races. In Virginia, it's a hotly contested governor's race between Democrat Ralph Northam and Republican Ed Gillespie. Another high-stakes election for governor of New Jersey will determine who succeeds Chris Christie. We already told you about that one. Let's discuss the Virginia race with Julian Epstein, a Democratic strategist and former chief counsel for the House Judiciary Committee. Kevin McCullough is a conservative syndicated radio host. Thanks, both of you, for being here. Julian, are you nervous about this race in Virginia?
Yes, I think Northam will probably win. The party out of the White House generally wins in the gubernatorial race in Virginia. I think the Democrats will probably win in New Jersey, and I think for the midterm elections, Democrats, the poll numbers are all showing, at least for Congress, that the public favors a Democratic-controlled Congress rather than a Republican one. So I think that's the good news for the Democrats. The bad news for the Democrats is that the race in Virginia is much closer than it should be. the Democratic candidate there has run a very lackluster campaign, has kind of run against Trump rather than being for something. And I think the lesson for the Democrats here is that even though we have a deeply unpopular president, the most unpopular president since we've been doing polling, 2 out of 3 Americans don't believe or trust or like the job he's doing, Democrats can't just run against Trump. They have to be for something. And I think the lack of them being for something that's very clear and understandable in Virginia means the race is a lot closer than it ought to be.
Kevin, the Real Clear Politics average of polling had Ralph Northam, the Democratic candidate in Virginia, up 6 points a month ago. Over the weekend, that average poll had him up by 2 points. Clearly, this race is getting tighter. Does the Republican candidate have a chance to pull it out, Ed Gillespie?
I think he does. And part of what you want to watch going into Election Day is not necessarily where the polls land at on that day, but which direction the momentum's headed. And clearly, Gillespie made up ground in the closing chapter of the campaign. And I agree with Julian on this. I think that the Democrats, without having anything more than Trump to run against, have not bettered themselves really in either of these gubernatorial races. I actually suspect New Jersey will be closer than what any of the polls have shown at this point, because neither Phil Murphy nor Mr. Northam in the 2 gubernatorial races have really cast a vision for what they're going to offer as an alternative. In New Jersey, it's just very much against Chris Christie. In the Virginia race, it's against President Trump. And Ed Gillespie he's got some momentum behind him. He's got a little bit of wind of his sails. And if the polls work out the way they did in the presidential election in November of last year, if the race is 2 points, I think Gillespie wins by about 3. So, and if they split today, this is a win for Republicans who have been on a big win streak since Trump got elected.
You mentioned, Julian, the new polling about President Trump. There's a CNN poll out that says roughly only 36% of Americans approve of the job he's doing, 58% disapprove. You can look at those numbers and say, okay, Democrats are sure to roll in both of those states, but look at all of the polls that suggested this man would never become president of the United States, and he has defied the expectations and defied the odds, it seems like, at every turn.
Well, look, I think there's good news and a bad news. Again, if you're looking at it from a kind of strictly a Democratic point of view here, it's really a 1/3, 2/3 split. 1/3 of the country likes the job he's doing, 1/3 believes in him, 1/3 doesn't like the Russia investigation, 2/3 the opposite. They all think he's doing a bad job, they don't believe what he says, and they think the Russia investigation is very important. I think the other factor in your question is, remember, Hillary Clinton was a deeply unpopular candidate, so I think that he had an artificial bump because of that. The point here for the Democrats, however, is they can't just simply run against Trump. That's not going to be enough. We've had the largest peacetime expansion in job creation in the last 7-8 years since Obama took over in 2009 and continuing through Trump. The problem is that wages are going down now. And the fact that you don't hear Democrats out there talking about how working class Americans are being forgotten on a daily basis, how their incomes are not increasing, their economic security is not increasing, their health care is not where it ought to be, that they're not dealing with bread and butter issues, and instead they're dealing with these kind of silly issues that the Virginia debate has taken them to, is bad news for Democrats. They need to be much more affirmative in what they believe in.
I'm getting the wrap. We're about to hit a commercial break. Julian Epstein, thank you. Kevin, I owe you the last answer next time. A Fox News alert and a serious situation in Pennsylvania right now. The helicopter shot is following an ambulance carrying a state trooper who was shot during a traffic stop. Now, this took place in Plainfield Township, quite a rural area of the state, in the Lehigh Valley, a little bit northeast of Allentown and Bethlehem, about 65 miles or so north of Philadelphia. The trooper's condition not immediately known, but he or she was shot during a traffic stop. On the way to the hospital now. When we get more information about what transpired there, we'll bring it to you live.
Right now, tensions escalating between Saudi Arabia and Iran after a ballistic missile from Yemen rebels came close to the Saudi capital over the weekend. This comes as a purge of Saudi princes and businessmen expands. Connor Powell is live from our Middle East Bureau with the latest on this. There are a lot of pieces to this story, Connor.
Yeah, Melissa, a lot of eyes nervously watching Saudi Arabia right now for two different but also very much connected reasons. Over the weekend, as you said, a missile was fired from inside Yemen that landed near the Saudi airport in Riyadh. That missile was fired, according to Saudis, by the Iranian-linked Houthi rebels. But Saudi Arabia is also laying blame and pointing the finger squarely at Iran, calling it a blatant act of military aggression by the Iranian regime. Now, this comes as the ambitious Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman ordered the arrest of dozens senior Saudi royals, military commanders, and businessmen. The purge was carried out under the pretext of fighting corruption, but it's also clearly very much a move to consolidate his power in the kingdom. Among those arrested was Al Walid bin Talal, a major Wall Street player, one of the richest men in the world. He invests in companies such as Apple and Fox News' parent company, 21st Century Fox. Bin Salman has tried to build a reputation as a reformer, but the 32-year-old heir to the throne there is most known for intensifying the regional conflict. The Trump administration counts him as a valuable ally, but Melissa, there are a lot of concerns that maybe he's ramping up the tensions with Iran too quickly, and also that he's creating some chaos internally in terms of the fabric and stability of Saudi Arabia. So there are a lot of people watching these two things, both the conflict with Iran and also the internal divisions and the purge there. Just wondering how much chaos can Saudi Arabia take right now, and how stable is it, Melissa?
Yeah, it's a very big change. The first king from this third generation. We will keep an eye on it. Thank you so much, John.
We are learning more about the gunman who opened fire and killed 26